My name is Isabella Miller, and at 31 years old. The elevator doors slid open with that soft mechanical sigh, and I stepped into the lobby of our building, expecting the usual quiet hum of early evening. My bag weighed more than it should have, emails left unanswered, deadlines pressing. But nothing felt heavier than the sense of anticipation I carried every time I walked home to William. I reached our apartment door and fumbled with my keys. My thumb brushed the cool metal, and something in my chest tightened, a subtle warning I ignored. I had always dismissed that feeling, attributing it to stress. But today, it was different. The door swung open before I could finish the thought. And then I saw them. William, my William, calm, collected, the man who could read my moods before I even noticed them, was pressed against someone else. His arms wrapped around Marissa, our yoga instructor, her hair falling across his shoulder in careless strands. The world narrowed. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint scent of jasmine from the diffuser, all of it blurred into insignificance. My breath caught, sharp and ragged. I could feel the room spinning, though the floor remained steady beneath my feet. Isabella, William's voice, smooth as always, barely registered. He didn't even flinch, didn't even try to hide. There was no shame, no panic, just a calm that made my stomach twist. I shut the door softly behind me, leaning against it as if it could shield me from what I had just witnessed. Marissa pulled back, startled, her eyes widening as if seeing me for the first time. William's hand lingered on her arm, not tender, not affectionate, just lingering. Then came the text. My phone buzzed in my pocket, his message lighting up the screen before I could even process. The morning light spilled into the apartment through the clean, clear windows. I sipped her coffee and let her gaze wander over the living room. She had spent the night reflecting, replaying William's smug text. "You won't survive a single day without me." The words still stung, but instead of despair, they ignited something deeper, a spark of determination. Today would not be about mourning. It would be about reclaiming. She started in the kitchen, the heart of the home that had been quietly commandeered over the years by William's careless habits. Every cabinet, drawer, and countertop was examined and meticulously cleaned. Hidden behind a row of supposedly organized spice jars, she discovered old takeout containers, some with mold creeping along the edges. A small smile tugged at her lips. He called me a slob? She thought, rolling her eyes. Let's see who's really in control now. By mid-morning, the apartment looked as if it had been reborn. Counters gleamed, floors sparkled, windows opened freely to let in the crisp air, carrying the faint scent of the city's autumn leaves. Isabella felt a peculiar joy in this act of reclamation. Every sweep of the broom, every polished surface was a small defiance, a quiet victory against the betrayal that had threatened to undo her. But her transformation wasn't limited to the apartment. Mrs. Tomoko, her elderly neighbor, had been struggling since a recent hip injury. Her son lived across the country, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. Isabella decided to make her help a part of her routine. Each afternoon, she would prepare meals for Mrs. Tomoko, carefully portioned and labeled. Teriyaki salmon with sesame vegetables, homemade kimchi, roasted root vegetables. The kitchen became a place of creation and care, not just survival. Mrs. Tomoko watched her with a gentle, approving smile. "You have a gift, Isabella," she said one day, setting a hand on hers. "Your heart. It's still so full, even after everything." Isabella felt a warmth that no confrontation with William could ever produce. Helping someone, nurturing another life. It was as if the act of giving was also sewing together her own sense of self, patching the cracks left by betrayal. She also started exploring new pursuits she had long deferred. Cooking classes, pottery lessons, activities William had dismissed as frivolous or hipster nonsense. Yet here she was, kneading dough, shaping clay, experimenting with flavors and textures that thrilled her senses. Each lesson was a small reclaiming of autonomy, a subtle declaration. I am not defined by you. I am larger, fuller, more capable. Messages and calls from friends trickled in. Concerned, sympathetic, some even hinting at William's supposed misfortune at losing her. But Isabella ignored them, letting the outside chatter fade. Her world had narrowed, not to grief, but to focus. Herself, her apartment, her neighbor, her growth. And growth it was. She discovered new strengths in herself, patience she hadn't realized she possessed, ingenuity in problem solving, creativity in both her meals and her pottery. With each small victory, a quiet thrill coursed through her veins. The woman who had once allowed William's smirks and subtle manipulations to shape her day-to-day life now orchestrated every corner of her world. Even her balcony, previously neglected under William's half-hearted care, became a sanctuary. Herbs thrived in neatly arranged pots, tomatoes ripened in clusters, and small flowers added bursts of color. Isabella found herself smiling each morning at the sight, as if the plants themselves were applauding her resurgence. At night, she would sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, reflecting on her journey so far. I am stronger than I realized, she thought. I am enough for myself. I don't need anyone else to define me, to complete me, to hold me together. There was an almost meditative rhythm to her days now, cleaning in the morning, caring for Mrs. Tomoko in the afternoon, attending classes, or exploring hobbies in the evening. Each task reinforced the lesson that William's absence did not diminish her. In fact, it gave her freedom she hadn't felt in years. The subtle joy of this new life was undercut, briefly, by lingering memories of betrayal. Sometimes she would catch herself imagining William's smug face, his certainty that she couldn't survive without him. But each time she countered it with a quiet internal challenge. Try me. The days stretched into a week, and the apartment became unrecognizable, not in a sterile, impersonal way, but alive. Every corner told a story of intention, care, and personal triumph. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread, roasted herbs, and the faint undertone of clay dust from her pottery projects. The home hummed with her energy. And then came the first real test, the knock on the door. It was light but insistent, pulling Isabella from her thoughts. She opened it slowly, heart steady, expecting she didn't know what. The hallway was empty, except for a note slipped under the door. Check your phone, E. Her pulse quickened, but not with fear. Curiosity, maybe even a flash of anticipation. She retrieved her phone. William's name blinked on the screen. A message. Succinct. I need to talk. This can't wait. Isabella stared at the text for a long moment, considering her options. Part of her wanted to delete it immediately, to erase his presence entirely. But another part, the part that had grown quietly, resiliently over the last week, curious to see how he would react to the woman she had become. She set the phone aside without replying. Her apartment, her life, her mornings, her balcony, her pottery, everything had shifted. And the shift wasn't for him, it was for her. For the first time in years, Isabella slept that night, not with anxiety clawing at her chest, but with the gentle hum of self-possession. She was no longer the woman who feared abandonment. She was the woman who thrived in spite of it. Let him come, she thought in the darkness, feeling the weight of her own power. He'll see soon enough that I am no one's possession. And in that quiet night, the seeds of her transformation, of her ultimate triumph, were firmly planted. The first time William's presence brushed against Isabella's new life, it was almost imperceptible, a subtle echo, a flicker in the corner of her mind. A message on her phone. Isabella, we need to talk. It's important, please. The sender's name made her stomach twist for just a moment, the memory of betrayal sharp and raw. Then she exhaled slowly, letting the flash of old fear dissolve. Not today, she thought. Not ever again. She didn't reply. Instead, she looked around her apartment, the bright kitchen where herbs thrived in neat pots, the living room furniture rearranged for comfort, the small clay bowl on the counter filled with freshly picked cherry tomatoes from her balcony garden. Each detail was a testament. She had built this life for herself, and no one could take that away. A week passed, and his attempts escalated. A call from an unknown number claiming to be him in an emergency. A friend of his messaging through social media, asking if she was okay and subtly fishing for information. Each time, Isabella paused, considered, and then chose silence. Not out of spite, but because she had learned something invaluable. Control over her own reaction was far more powerful than any argument, any manipulation he could attempt. Meanwhile, her own days blossomed with purpose and growth. Cooking classes introduced her to new techniques and new friends who admired her precision and curiosity. Pottery became not just a hobby, but a meditation, a place where her hands could shape beauty and permanence out of raw clay. Each day, she returned home, carrying a small piece of accomplishment, a fragment of autonomy that William had never truly witnessed. And yet, he noticed. It was subtle at first, a glance in the stairwell, a flicker of recognition at the grocery store, but soon it became more direct. William appeared at the building lobby one afternoon, claiming he needed to retrieve something left behind. Isabella didn't answer. She continued down the hallway, her bags filled with ingredients for Mrs. Tomoko's dinner, the faint aroma of fresh herbs clinging to her. He saw, though, the apartment she had transformed. Through the narrow mailroom window, he glimpsed the balcony alive with greenery, the light reflecting off the freshly polished countertops. Something in his expression shifted, not anger, not envy entirely, but a dawning realization. The woman he had assumed would crumble was thriving, without him. The first real confrontation came not with words, but with observation. Isabella returned from her pottery class one Thursday evening to find a new energy humming through the building. The elevator doors opened to reveal William standing casually, almost innocuously, as if fate had led him there. He caught sight of her, and for a fleeting moment, recognition flickered in his eyes. She met his gaze evenly, letting him see what he hadn't anticipated: calm, confidence, control. "You're different," he said, finally breaking the silence. Isabella tilted her head slightly, letting the words hang in the air. "I've had a week to reclaim what's mine," she replied softly, deliberately. Not a question, not an apology, a statement. He stepped closer, hesitant, trying to measure her reaction. I thought maybe we could talk." She smiled faintly, almost gently. "Talk about what? About the betrayal? About the lies? Or about how you thought you could control me?" He flinched, but she didn't relent. Her life had grown beyond the boundaries of his expectations. Every corner of the apartment, every meal prepared for Mrs. Tomoko, every piece of pottery on the shelf shouted a truth he could not undo. Isabella Miller was no one's property, no one's project, no one's possession. The moment passed, and he left without further insistence, not out of mercy, not because she let him go, but because her quiet power, the resilience she had forged through action and care, spoke louder than any argument could. In the evenings, she would sit at her kitchen table, the city lights reflecting off the freshly cleaned surfaces, and allow herself a small smile. Each day, her life expanded further from his shadow. The apartment was vibrant, alive, a reflection of her inner state. Each pot she shaped, each meal she prepared, each small kindness extended to Mrs. Tomoko was a building block in the fortress she had erected around herself, strong, steady, and unassailable. And yet, the tension lingered, an invisible thread running through her days. She knew he might try again. She knew he might attempt to insert himself into her carefully constructed life. But now, she welcomed the challenge, not with fear, but with anticipation. "Let him come," she thought one evening, staring at the clay bowl she had shaped with her own hands. "He'll see who I've become." Because this wasn't just survival anymore, this was transformation. This was empowerment. And when the time came for him to face her fully, she would be ready, not just to survive, but to triumph. The first test had been subtle, almost merciless in its quiet pressure, but Isabella had endured, and in enduring, she had grown. The next encounter, she knew, would demand more than calm observation. It would demand action. And for the first time since the discovery, she felt ready, not just emotionally, but strategically. She had learned patience, resilience, and the power of self-possession. William had underestimated her. That had been his first mistake. And mistakes, she thought with a small private smile, were about to become his downfall. The knock at the door was aggressive this time, urgent, almost desperate. Isabella had been in the middle of shaping a delicate clay bowl, her hands dusted with wet earth, her mind absorbed in the rhythm of creation. She set the clay aside and opened the door. There he stood, William, disheveled in a way she had never seen, his carefully composed demeanor cracked. Behind him, 2 suitcases leaned like silent witnesses to his audacity. "I need some things," he said, voice low, trying to reclaim authority that no longer existed. Isabella stepped aside, her posture calm, deliberate. "Of course, grab them quickly." He paused, scanning the apartment, and for the first time his gaze faltered. The space she had transformed, bright, clean, alive, was not what he had left behind. The balcony garden flourished with herbs and small vegetables. The kitchen counters gleamed. The shelves held pottery she had shaped herself, every piece a testament to her renewed life. "You hired a cleaner?" he asked, suspicion in his tone. "Nope," Isabella replied simply, letting a faint smile tug at the corner of her lips. "I did it myself." He wandered into the kitchen, eyes scanning the labeled containers of meals prepared for Mrs. Tomoko. Teriyaki salmon, roasted vegetables, kimchi, homemade pasta sauce, all neatly arranged and meticulously stored. He swallowed, realization dawning. This isn't the same apartment," he murmured, almost to himself. Isabella shook her head. "It's mine now, not yours. I reclaimed it when you thought I'd fall apart." The first real test had arrived. William tried reasoning, manipulation, charm, all the tools he had used so effortlessly in the past. But Isabella remained composed. Each word he spoke, every plea or excuse, met with quiet observation. She had practiced patience and resilience, and it showed. He finally let slip the words she had expected, a last attempt at control. "I thought maybe we could work this out." Isabella's eyes softened, not with pity, but with quiet resolve. "Work this out? William, you cheated in my home, sent me a message thinking you could terrify me, and left. You assumed I couldn't survive without you. Look around. I can. I am thriving, alone." For the first time, she noticed the weight of his gaze, the disbelief, the shock. He had never anticipated this transformation. The woman he had assumed weak, dependent, vulnerable, was strong, independent, and unshakable. She walked to the living room, motioning toward the small folder on the coffee table. "Everything you left behind is organized, stored safely. You'll retrieve it, and we'll both move forward." He hesitated, perhaps realizing there was no argument left to win. No charm, no manipulation could alter the truth. Isabella was free. He had lost not through confrontation, but through quiet transformation, through action, through her refusal to crumble. The next few minutes passed with orderly collection of his belongings. Not a word more about their relationship, not a plea for forgiveness. He packed, gathered, and eventually, silently, departed. Isabella closed the door, her heart steady, her mind clear. She moved back to her kitchen table, letting herself sink into the comfort of her own rhythm. Clay dust lingered on her hands, the scent of herbs and spices filled the air, and the city outside hummed with life. She picked up her unfinished bowl and shaped it carefully, each rotation of her hands a reaffirmation. This life, this space, this self was hers. That evening, Mrs. Tomoko stopped by with a small gift, a handwritten note, and a bag of fresh ingredients for the week. "You've done more than help me," she said, her eyes misty. "You've reminded me that care, true care, transforms everything." Isabella smiled, her chest warm with quiet triumph. She realized then that her growth wasn't just about survival. It was about purpose, contribution, and reclaiming the joy that had been eclipsed by manipulation and betrayal. The next weeks brought small joys. Pottery classes where she sold a few of her creations, cooking lessons where she experimented with new recipes, evening walks, with friends who had become companions in her journey of rediscovery. Each day, her life expanded further, not defined by loss, but by possibility. William's attempts to intrude eventually ceased. He saw, finally, that the woman he had underestimated had grown beyond his reach. Isabella did not gloat. She did not need to. Her victories were quiet, profound, and lasting. She leaned back in her chair one evening, sipping tea, and looked out at the balcony garden she had nurtured with her own hands. She traced her fingers over the rim of a small clay bowl she had made that afternoon, the tomatoes within it gleaming under the soft light. "I am enough. I am strong. I am free." The betrayal had shattered illusions, but it had also uncovered truth, her strength, her resilience, her capacity for growth. And now, in the calm of her reclaimed home, Isabella Miller realized the most empowering truth of all. The person who once insisted she couldn't survive without him was the one she never needed. Morning sunlight filtered through Isabella Miller's apartment, illuminating the vibrant greenery of her balcony garden. The scent of fresh herbs mingled with the warm aroma of a breakfast she had prepared, perfectly roasted vegetables, fluffy scrambled eggs, and freshly baked bread. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, her hands brushing over a clay bowl she had shaped the day before. It had been months since William had tried to re-enter her life, each attempt faltering against the steadfast boundary Isabella had established. The apartment, once a site of tension and betrayal, now thrummed with life and calm. Every corner bore her mark. The carefully organized kitchen, the thriving balcony garden, the pottery pieces she had proudly created. It was more than a home, it was a reflection of her resilience. Her phone buzzed lightly on the counter, a message from Ko, the cooking instructor she had met through Mrs. Tomoko. "Workshop this weekend. Want to join as co-instructor?" Isabella smiled, a subtle thrill coursing through her. It was an opportunity she would have dismissed before, too afraid to step beyond what others dictated. Now she embraced it. Later that afternoon, she delivered a portioned meal to Mrs. Tomoko, the woman's face lighting up as Isabella entered. "You've outdone yourself again," she said warmly. "Your heart shines through in every dish." Isabella's chest swelled with quiet pride. Each act of care, each intentional choice she had made since William's betrayal was a testament to her own power. She had not just survived, she had flourished. Even her friendships had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her pottery classmates admired her dedication. Her culinary peers respected her creativity. And her neighbors, once distant, now leaned on her as a source of warmth and reliability. In every sphere, Isabella's life had expanded, rooted not in dependence on another, but in her own strength and intention. One evening, as she returned from a late cooking class, Isabella paused on the balcony. The city stretched below her, alive with light and possibility. She picked a small cluster of ripe tomatoes and placed them carefully in a clay bowl, feeling the satisfaction of creation, cultivation, and perseverance. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a delivery from the pottery studio, a small plaque with her name inscribed, recognizing her contributions as a student and collaborator. She held it to her chest and laughed softly. Recognition didn't have to come from William or anyone who had doubted her. It came from her own effort, her own vision. The weeks rolled on, each day layered with growth and fulfillment. She signed up for more advanced cooking courses, began selling pottery at local artisan fairs, and spent long afternoons with Mrs. Tomoko, sharing stories and laughter. Her apartment, her life, had become a sanctuary of achievement and serenity. And somewhere in the distance, William faded from her narrative, a shadow of the past. She did not resent him. She did not seek revenge. His attempts to interfere had only highlighted the strength she had cultivated. The irony was not lost on her. The man who had believed she could not survive without him had inadvertently taught her how to thrive on her own. As Isabella leaned back in her chair that evening, tea in hand, she whispered to herself, a smile curling across her face. "I didn't just survive. I created. I cared. I grew. And I am enough. Without anyone to define me, without anyone to control me, I am finally completely free." The clay bowl on the table, filled with her own harvest, sat as a quiet symbol of her journey. The apartment, alive with light, greenery, and personal expression, stood as a monument to her resilience. And in that quiet, glowing moment, Isabella Miller felt a profound sense of peace and empowerment. The betrayal that had once threatened to unravel her life had instead revealed her strength. The future was hers, vibrant, open, and wholly her own. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of fresh herbs and clay dust, and allowed herself to fully embrace the life she had painstakingly rebuilt. The person who once claimed she wouldn't last a day without him, she had lasted months, and she would continue to thrive for years to come. The home she had rebuilt, the skills she had honed, the love she had shared with others, and most importantly, the deep respect she had cultivated for herself, were proof enough. She needed no one else to validate her life. Isabella smiled again, this time with quiet triumph, her heart steady and her spirit soaring. She had been betrayed, but she had transcended. She had been tested, but she had emerged stronger. And in that realization, she found the most enduring victory of all. "You won't survive a single day without me." I stared at it, dumbfounded. The audacity, the arrogance, the sheer, suffocating smugness of those words. I should have yelled, I should have cried, I should have thrown something, anything, to shatter the calm William wore like armor. But instead, I felt an unfamiliar quiet settle over me. "Try me," I thought, the words forming in my mind almost involuntarily, not out loud, Not yet. Just in the silent, trembling space between disbelief and the first spark of something else, something that would not allow me to break. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, noticing everything I had overlooked in the haze of our 2 years together. The cluttered countertops, the dusty corners, the misaligned frames, remnants of a life that had slowly become more about William's control than my own joy. And suddenly, clarity struck me with the force of revelation. He thought he could undo me, but he had no idea what I was capable of. I sank onto the couch he'd claimed as his, letting the silence settle. I listened to the faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft creak of the building settling around me, and for the first time I heard my own heartbeat. Not the one that raced with anxiety or fear, but steady, determined, relentless. I remembered the nights I had rearranged this apartment to feel like home. The weekends spent shopping for plants, for little things that made life vibrant. The evenings we'd spent cooking side by side, laughter spilling over recipes and spilled flour. He had watched it all, and he had taken it for granted, as if I were merely background scenery in his own life. And now he thought he could terrify me with absence. The thought was almost laughable. I rose, slowly, deliberately, and began examining the apartment with a new eye. The kitchen, the living room, even the balcony. Everything had been compromised by neglect or his casual disregard. Forgotten dishes stacked in the sink, crumbs hiding in corners, a faint layer of dust on the windowsill. William had called me a slob once, in passing, smiling as if it were a joke. Funny how quickly the truth revealed itself. He had been blind to my patience, my efforts, my care. I made a decision then, silent but resolute. This apartment, this life, would not be his to manipulate any longer. First, I would reclaim my space. I started with the countertops, clearing the clutter, scrubbing the surfaces until they gleamed. I found items stashed away, forgotten food, the remnants of his casual mess disguised as harmlessness. Each object I touched, I restored, not for him, not for anyone, but for myself. As I worked, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. Grief for what I had lost, yes, but also the raw thrill of reclaiming what was mine. With every sweep of the cloth, every adjustment of a frame or plant, I began to breathe again. The apartment transformed beneath my hands, and with it, something inside me shifted. And yet, the quiet threat lingered. William's message pulsed in my mind. You won't survive a single day without me. I smiled, almost cruelly, in that private, hidden way that comes before full awakening. Try me, because I would. Not out of spite, not to punish him, but because for the first time in 2 years, I felt a small, fierce spark of possibility. By the time the night had fallen, I had wiped down every surface, washed and reorganized the dishes, and even set up a few plants on the windowsill to soak in the fading light. The apartment no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a home waiting for me to return to fully, not him. And when I finally sat on the newly cleared couch, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea I had made for myself, I allowed a thought to form. This wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning. The betrayal was raw. The heartbreak was real. But something else, quiet and unyielding, had already taken root in my chest. Resilience. Determination. A promise to myself that the next chapter would not be written by anyone else. And somewhere in that space, between heartbreak and possibility, I felt it. The first glimmering pulse of empowerment. I didn't know exactly what would come next. I didn't know if William would try to return. I didn't know if the betrayal would echo in the days ahead. But I did know this. He had underestimated me, and that was the greatest mistake he would ever make. I poured myself another cup of tea, set it on the windowsill beside a small row of herbs, and let the city hum around me. Outside, the lights flickered and shimmered in the distance, indifferent to my pain, and yet strangely comforting in their constancy. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let myself imagine life beyond this moment. A life of choice, of color, of energy, of me, unbound by someone else's manipulation or expectation. And for the first time since the discovery, I smiled. Not because it was easy, not because the hurt had vanished, but because I realized I could survive. I could thrive. I could reclaim everything. And I would.